Hello everybody, it's Professor Rich, and this is another advanced English listening practice video. The topic will be British people. So we're going to have some comprehension questions for you to look at while you listen, and we're going to have the useful vocabulary and phrases explained at the end of the video. The specific topic today is British life and routines in Britain. So you're going to listen to the audio and decide if the statements are true or false. If you think the statements are false, then can you correct the statements so that they're true? First, read the statements and check any vocabulary you don't understand. If you need to, turn on the subtitles and pause the video when you want. All right, let's do this. Let's do this. First of all, I should probably make a quick point about something. Although I think of myself as British in totality, I am first and foremost English. I grew up in England. I have a strong affinity towards English values, historical English values, in fact, things like Magna Carta and so on. And that's something that I might talk about in a future video. But I'm talking from an English perspective here, as opposed to a Scottish or Welsh or Northern Irish one. So, England, English routines. Let's start with the English morning. Contrary to popular belief, English people do not spend their mornings tucking into a classic, world-renowned English breakfast of sausages, bacon, beans, eggs, fried bread, hash browns, and watery coffee. Watery coffee? Watery coffee. Watery coffee. As it happens, I have a watery coffee right here. Although it's true that most English people love that kind of breakfast, including me, this great morning banquet, also known as a full English, is normally saved for special occasions. Most notably, those special occasions when you've had one or two too many pints the night before, if you know what I mean. We call it a hangover. Instead, what we normally have for breakfast, the English breakfast, normally consists of cereal or eggs and toast in some form or another. A very popular type of eggs and toast, actually, is called eggs and soldiers. So eggs and soldiers is basically toast cut into strips with a soft-boiled egg to dip them into. So you could dip your toast into your soft-boiled egg. Things like rice and noodles and fish and stuff like that for breakfast, that will be relatively alien to English people, even maybe a little bit weird. The only thing I would say is that something that has kind of come into our breakfast possibilities is something we call the continental breakfast, which is sort of like dried meat and cheeses and stuff. Comes from like the Mediterranean, and English people kind of like that. They call it a continental breakfast, even though people in continental Europe don't eat it all that much. Actually, the popular breakfast in continental Europe tends to be pastries and pasties and cakes with a coffee, stuff like that. So the working day. Most English people start work at about 9 and finish at 5, so they get up at 7 normally. And the normal working week is Monday to Friday with Saturday and Sunday off, or at least one of those days off. Now, the average job in England tends to be some kind of administrative work. Office work, banking, civil service. There's lots of people who work in these sorts of areas. In fact, when we were part of the EU, I think people used to think of London as sort of the administrative capital of Europe. Not like the central administration, like Belgium, but the kind of more overall administrative capital. It's where all the banks had their offices. It's where the headquarters of the accounts departments of these European companies were. And now let's take a break and see the answers to part 1. And here are the questions for part 2. Now, talking about lunch. Lunch is kind of a neglected meal in England. And I can say that having been someone who lived in Spain for 9 years. Apart from the traditional Sunday lunch, which is roast beef and gravy and vegetables, and it's a big meal, it's very traditional, most English lunches are a pretty poor affair. They're normally a kind of a rushed sandwich, sat at your desk, in one hand you got your phone, you're speaking to someone, and in another hand you got your sandwich where you kind of type and read emails at the same time. And I can kind of understand actually why continental Europeans are kind of a little bit critical of English food because of things like that, the rush lunch, right? Because lunch is so important to people in the Mediterranean, for example. However, I do think that English food as a whole gets a worse reputation than it deserves. I think, well, I know we have some of the best bread in the world. I think the only better bread that you can get is Italian or French bread. And I'm happy to be on record saying that. I've eaten bread in many different countries. The other thing is English meat's pretty good. You might not believe it. Spring lamb is fantastic. And then we get to the end of the working day. So when the majority of English people arrive home from work, that'll be about 6 or 7 p.m., they'll probably be looking forward to their tea. Especially in the north of England, their tea. Now, what I mean by tea is not a hot, milky drink of brewed herbs. Rather, tea is the most common word for the evening meal of the day, sometimes called dinner or supper, depending on where you live. But tea time, actually means eating in the evening. So when English people get home and they're looking forward to their tea, that means they're looking forward to eating when they get home. And this meal tends to be quite a big meal, actually, which some people consider to be unhealthy, to have that big meal at the end of the day, especially when it's all carbohydrates like English food, potatoes and pies and all that kind of stuff. Now, you might think, well, what happened to the traditional tea time, which was like tea and cakes and whatever, right? Well, that was always very upper class. You might find it in, a Jane Austen novel or something like that. And if you go to some estate or castle or whatever, then you'll come across this touristy idea of tea time. But it's not really how most people live their lives. And 90% of people, when they say tea time, it's time for tea, they actually mean food. They're talking about the meal. It's that big meal to replenish the day's energy, a hard day's work in the office, stamping pieces of paper and sending emails, okay? So, a lot of Mediterranean people used to say to me, what, 6, 7 o'clock? That's when you're eating your evening meal? Don't you get hungry before you go to bed? Well, yeah, actually, you do. And that's why you have a snack, right? So you have your tea about 6 or 7 o'clock, and then you might have a snack about 9 or 10. Okay, a snack could be a small sandwich, or you could just drink copious amounts of coffee or tea, which is another point, actually. Coffee has become very popular in England now. I think tea is still more popular, but coffee, especially drinking coffee outside, a place like Costa Coffee, like people love that now. It's really popular in England. So, what about that famous English food that everyone's heard of, fish and chips? Well, I am sorry to disappoint you folks, but fish and chips is rather a rare dish to eat in England, and it's a rare junk food. We've always thought of it as a junk food. Right, it's something you pay £3 or £4 down the local chippy for some fried fish and chips, and it's all greasy and fatty, and I don't think anyone, well, there'll be someone, but most people wouldn't eat that more than maybe once every couple of months. So it's really not very common at all. To cook it at home, I think, is even less common. I mean, for one, to cook it like they do in the chippy, you'd have to have a deep fat fryer, and who has a deep fat fryer at home? No one, right? maybe 1 in every million people or something. If I have fish and chips more than twice in a single year, that would be an exceptional year. So, yeah. Why have we got a reputation for it? I have no idea. Maybe no one else was mad enough to put eggy flour on fish and then fry it. It's quite a strange thing to do, especially with cod or haddock, which is a really nice fish that you could just have fresh. But there you go. So, let's move on to bedtime. How do English people sleep? Well, I know you want to know. By far, the most common bedroom attire these days is underwear. That is boxer shorts if you're a man, or, knickers and bra if you're a lady. Sleeping in pajamas can happen in the winter, but we have very good quilts and we have very well insulated houses, so normally pajamas are not necessary. You might be a bit too hot. Depends, though. Some people like them. We also have these things called hot water bottles, which are basically kind of large, thick water balloons, which we fill with almost boiling hot water and sleep next to. Somehow, they rarely burst, and serious burns are almost unheard of. Almost. No, really. I mean, they're surprisingly... You would think there'd be more accidents with those things. There probably were in the past, but now they're very safe. So... yeah. Sleeping nude, well, I think it happens, but it's pretty rare for English people. I would say it's in the minority. And there you have it, folks. A day in the life of an Englishman or woman. God save the Queen and all that. All right, so now let's check our answers to part 2. Here are some of the phrases which I said in the audio. Look at the phrases and choose the correct meaning A, B, C, or D. And the answers. So now you want to learn those things, right? So what you need is personalization. That means you take control of these phrases and you own them. You make them your phrases. So I want you to choose 2 or 3 of the phrases, and then I want you to make your own examples of them. For example, let's take not be mad enough to. Here's 2 examples of that. These are 2 examples that I personalized. My brother will eat anything, but even he's not mad enough to drink Tabasco sauce. I love learning languages, but I'm not mad enough to try and learn Mandarin Chinese in 1 year. The act of personalization helps to cement the phrase in your mind. It connects the phrase to other parts of your mind and means it's more likely you'll remember it and it's more likely you'll use it. It doesn't really matter if the examples that you think of are true or not. The only important thing is that you create the examples. Now, in order to do this, you do need to really understand the meaning of the phrase and also the form of the phrase so that the example you create is a good example that a native speaker would say. If you want help with that, then you can try searching for the phrase on Google or YouTube or Youglish and see how people use it in the real world. And then you make your personalized example. The next step, after you've written down your personalized examples, is say it out loud, like I just did with my 2 examples. Say it out loud. Try to get that natural, easy pronunciation, not word for word, like my brother will eat. No, my brother will eat anything, but even he's not mad enough to drink Tabasco sauce from the bottle, right? Try to get some natural easy flowing connected speech pronunciation. So thank you very much for watching, everybody, especially if you're watching this far. Please go right now to the comments, post a comment and say, thank you, Rich. I enjoyed this video. I enjoyed this video because comments are so important to let me know that there's people there who really value these videos, and things like that really encourage me to make more videos. Let's show Susan Wojcinski that you can resurrect a dead YouTube channel. That's what I'm doing here, everybody. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you later.